cheating isn't always an action. Sometimes it's a slow emotional drift, a disconnection from our own values before we disconnect from someone else. That's what makes it terrifying, because it doesn't always look evil. It can even feel like a quest for truth, for something more real than what we already have. But the cost is heavy. Why do people cheat on the ones they love? Why do we betray people who once felt like home? Is it because we're broken? Or because we're afraid to face the truth within ourselves? This isn't a story of right or wrong. It's a story of psychology, of inner conflict, ego, unmet needs, and shadow desires. Because until you understand the real reasons people cheat, you'll keep thinking it only happens in weak relationships. But often it happens inside people who are at war with themselves. This is the psychology of cheating, not just the act of betrayal, but the mind that makes it possible. Let's begin. People don't cheat because they stop loving. They cheat because they start feeling unseen, unheard, or unreal, even to themselves. The real betrayal often begins long before the act. It begins in emotional silence, in moments when we feel our identity fading inside a relationship, when our smiles feel rehearsed, when our needs feel too heavy to speak aloud. Cheating is rarely about pleasure. It's about psychological relief, a temporary escape from the cage we silently built around our own heart. Some cheat because they want to feel desired again. Some cheat because they want to feel powerful. Some cheat because their own reflection has become unfamiliar, and they're desperate to see themselves through a different set of eyes. Behind every affair is a search, not for another person, but for a missing part of the self, a part that once felt alive, spontaneous, bold, and free. This isn't to justify it, it's to understand it, because unless we understand the emotional hunger beneath the surface, we will always treat cheating as a moral failure instead of a psychological collapse. And often the one who cheats doesn't fully know why. They rationalize it, blame the other, avoid the mirror, but deep down there's a crack in the foundation, a disconnection from their own truth and from the emotional intimacy they once feared to ask for. Cheating doesn't begin with action. It begins with emotional disalignment, with a need ignored for too long, with a part of us that starts whispering, "You don't have to feel like this forever." And so the mind begins to drift, until the body follows. Sigmund Freud believed that human behavior is governed by a fragile balance, a constant tension between what we desire and what we know we shouldn't do. He called it the war between the id, the ego, and the superego. And in the act of cheating, this conflict becomes painfully visible. The id is the part of us that craves, unfiltered, primitive, impulsive. It wants what feels good now, the thrill, the attention, the validation, the pleasure. The superego is the voice of conscience, the internalized moral code that reminds us of who we're supposed to be. And between the two stands the ego, the mediator, constantly trying to balance desire with responsibility. When someone cheats, it's often the id overpowering the superego. The desire becomes louder than the guilt, the fantasy more vivid than the reality. And in that moment, the ego doesn't mediate. It negotiates. It justifies. It finds ways to make betrayal feel like an accident, a mistake, or even a necessity. But the truth is, in many acts of cheating, we're not just betraying another person. We're betraying the higher version of ourselves, the one that promised loyalty, the one that stood for truth. And the more we suppress our desires instead of understanding them, the stronger they become. Freud didn't say this to excuse betrayal. He said it to explain why it's so common even among those who seem morally strong. In cheating, the pleasure is real, but short-lived. The guilt, however, lingers, because the superego always returns and it never forgets what the id tried to silence. Every act of betrayal begins as a psychological imbalance, and unless that imbalance is healed, it repeats, again and again. Carl Jung believed that every human carries a hidden side, a part of the self we suppress, deny, or refuse to admit. He called it the shadow. And when we cheat, it's often this shadow that takes control. Cheating doesn't always emerge from conscious thought. Sometimes it's the eruption of repressed desires, a side of us that craves danger, freedom, or dominance. The more we pretend to be perfect, the more power this hidden part gains. And one day it acts, not out of love, but out of unacknowledged emptiness. The shadow wants to be seen, and if we don't confront it consciously, it finds unconscious ways to express itself, through lies, betrayal, and impulsive choices that don't align with who we claim to be. In the act of cheating, we're not just hiding from our partner, we're hiding from ourselves. Jung believed that true wholeness only comes when we face this darker side, not to obey it but to understand it, because the part of us capable of betrayal is also the part capable of transformation. Before bodies betray, minds drift. And often emotional cheating is more devastating than the physical act, because it's quiet, invisible, and dangerously easy to deny. Emotional cheating begins with intimacy that was never meant to be shared, a message replied to with more warmth than needed, a connection that grows in secret, not because it's wrong at first, but because it feels like escape. We tell ourselves it's harmless, but slowly we start offering parts of our inner world to someone else. Thoughts, confessions, affection, comfort. In that space, boundaries blur. The partner feels it before they can explain it. A distance in the room, a lack of presence, a smile that no longer reaches the eyes. And though nothing wrong has happened yet, the damage has already begun. Because love doesn't die in big betrayals. It dies in subtle neglect. Emotional cheating is the mind's way of leaving without ever opening the door. It's the slow disappearance of intimacy, while pretending everything is fine. And when the truth finally comes out, the pain isn't just about what happened. It's about how long it was hidden. Some psychologists believe that cheating isn't always a flaw in character. It might be rooted in evolution, a survival instinct coded deep into our biology. But understanding that doesn't make it easier to accept. From an evolutionary standpoint, men and women developed different strategies to ensure the survival of their genes. Men sought multiple partners to spread their lineage. Women, in contrast, looked for stability, protection, and emotional security. These instincts weren't born out of betrayal, they were born out of survival. But we're not living in ancient caves anymore. We're not bound by biology alone. We have consciousness, we have choice. Still, remnants of those instincts remain. Some people cheat because they're chasing novelty, an unconscious hunger for variety, challenge, or conquest. Others cheat when they feel unsafe, unloved, or emotionally threatened, as a way to secure attention even if it comes with pain. The danger lies in mistaking an impulse for a truth. Just because we feel it doesn't mean we have to follow it. Evolution may explain the urge, but it doesn't excuse the betrayal. In the end, fidelity isn't just about resisting temptation. It's about transcending instinct and choosing integrity. Cheating creates two wounds, one in the person betrayed and one in the person who did the betraying. But they are not the same. For the one who is cheated on, the pain is existential. It's not just about the act. It's about what the act reveals. That trust wasn't mutual. That the emotional safety they believed in was an illusion. They begin to question everything, not just their partner, but themselves. Was I not enough? Did I miss the signs? Was any of it real? This is trauma, and it doesn't fade with time. It lingers in self-doubt, in fear, in the inability to trust again. The mind becomes a battlefield of memories that replay without consent, but the cheater doesn't escape untouched. Guilt, when real, is a quiet torment. It doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers at night. It shows up in moments of silence, in unexpected flashbacks, in the way they flinch when asked where they've been. Some feel no guilt, because they never had the emotional capacity to connect deeply in the first place. But those who do feel it often carry a weight they can't explain, not because they were caught, but because they caught a glimpse of who they could have been, and failed to be. The real tragedy of cheating is that no one wins. The victim loses a part of their trust. The cheater loses a part of their character. And both are forced to confront parts of themselves that are hard to look at. In that confrontation lies the choice, to numb it or to grow from it. There is a form of cheating more subtle, more destructive, and more common than we realize. The betrayal of oneself. Long before we lie to another, we lie to ourselves. We stay in relationships we've outgrown. We silence our needs to maintain peace. We pretend to be fulfilled, hoping that pretending will eventually make it true. And in doing so, we slowly abandon our truth. Self-betrayal is when you ignore the quiet voice inside, the one that says, this isn't right, this isn't love, this isn't you. It's when you choose comfort over honesty, convenience over alignment. It feels safe in the short term, but it corrodes your sense of identity. People often cheat not because they're cruel, but because they've become strangers to themselves. They no longer know what they want or who they're becoming. And in that confusion, they reach outside instead of looking within. True integrity begins with self-loyalty, because the moment you betray yourself, everything else becomes negotiable. And sometimes the person we're most afraid to lose is the version of ourselves we were never brave enough to become. After betrayal, nothing feels certain. The past feels contaminated, the future feels impossible. And yet, somewhere in that broken space, healing must begin. Some choose to rebuild, not because they forget, but because they choose to understand. Healing in this path demands more than apology. It requires accountability, radical honesty, a willingness to confront every layer of pain, every unspoken truth, every ignored wound. Rebuilding after cheating isn't about going back to how things were. It's about becoming something entirely new. And few relationships survive that fire. Others choose to leave, not out of bitterness but self-respect. They recognize that trust, once shattered, may never hold the same shape. And sometimes walking away is the most courageous act of self-protection. Both paths require strength. Both come with grief. There is no right answer, only what aligns with your truth. Cheating forces us to make choices we never wanted to face, to forgive or not, to stay or walk away, to rebuild or rebuild ourselves. But one thing is certain: we don't walk out of betrayal the same. We either grow harder or we grow wiser. Cheating doesn't just break trust, it breaks reality. It turns something sacred into something suspicious. What once felt like a home now feels like a lie, and it's not the act itself that destroys us. It's the meaning behind it. The silent message that you weren't enough, that someone else was worth the risk, that the promises weren't real. But that's only one side of the story. The deeper pain often lies within, not because we lost someone, but because we lost a version of ourselves that believed in something safe, pure, and untouchable. Betrayal shakes our inner compass. It makes us doubt what we saw, what we felt, what we gave. And worst of all, it makes us question whether love is ever real or always temporary. Yet within this collapse is also a moment of awakening. Because betrayal, no matter how brutal, brings clarity. It shows us who we are when everything falls apart. It shows us what we'll never settle for again. And it forces us to rebuild not from the surface, but from the center. Sometimes the person who hurt you the most wasn't a villain, just a mirror. A reflection of the love you keep giving to people who haven't learned how to hold it. But that doesn't mean the story ends in pain. Because healing begins when we stop asking, why did they do this to me? And start asking, what will I no longer allow myself to endure? If betrayal broke you, don't stop here. Watch this and rebuild yourself into someone they can never break again.